One time I came home and my boss had put a note on my door because I lived in the barracks, and he says, "Don't unpack. Plane tickets under the door." And I opened the door, and there on the floor is my airplane ticket. And I opened it up and I looked at it, and he had another note that says, "I'm not in town. I've already left, but here's your itinerary. Here's your plane ticket." And I looked at it and I'm like, "Oh, I'm leaving in like 16 hours."
I'm Aaron Cosworth, and welcome to Saving Our Sons. We are joined today by retired Master Sergeant Lance Schroeds. He comes from a military background with the Army, and he is going to take our conversation into preparation, into mindfulness, into being ready to survive the world around you and survive the circumstances you're in so that you can flourish, so that you can grow, and so that you can become what God wants you to be. And then you can train your sons to do the same thing. We're going to get into this conversation, and we're going to explore the depths of these things as we look at the need to see the resources around us, to see the opportunities that we have, and to remember it is the hard times that prepare us for where we are going in life.
Fill up what is missing in your life today with Truth.fm. Listen to Christian content from around the world. Get the Truth.fm app for your phone today. To learn more, visit Truth.fm/app.
The Eternal Truth Lecture Series features respected ministers from around the Brotherhood who speak on topics which encourage America to return to righteousness.
Is it time for a new church website? Join Aaron Cosworth for a training on how to build a church website. Visit cosworth.net/webinar. cosworth.net/webinar. Today, our conversation is with Lance Schroeds. He's a retired military individual. He is a retired Master Sergeant in the Army. And we are talking about dads, like we do on this podcast. We are talking about fatherhood. We're going to explore what it means to be a dad, to teach your children how to survive in this world spiritually, physically, and also in nature. So, Lance, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I've been married to Clara for about 17 years. We have 10 children, 5 are boys, 5 are girls. My oldest is almost 16, and my youngest is about 1. We homeschool. The Army brought us to Alaska about 11 years ago, and I was still in the Army for about the 4 years. So my last 4 years in the Army was here. And then when we got out, we just stayed here in Alaska. And like I said, we homeschool.
You know, one of the things that I think is interesting is, as you mentioned some of those things, is you, I know from talking to you before that you started off in West Virginia. You haven't lived your whole life in Alaska. What kind of captured you all in Alaska? You said you got there initially because of the military, because of your time in the military, but what caused you to stay?
So I walked right into a job. So I retired from the Army, walked right into a job that was really good, that lasted a year. It was a contract position, teaching combat medicine to infantrymen. And so that was one thing. But also we were interested in working with and staying with the church that we found here. We were very involved. They have a lot of children. The congregation, I don't know, pre-COVID was about 130. Probably half of those was under 20 or 25. You know, those are fuzzy numbers, but that's about right. And so there's a lot of kids here. It's a great state to homeschool in. It also is a great place to be able to spend time with your family doing a lot of different activities. And we like the people, we like the state, you know, we like the church.
That's great. You know, there's probably some of our listeners who have been to Alaska. I've been there once for a very, very short weekend for somebody's wedding. And as you live in a place like Alaska, it is very different from a lot of the places down here in the southern 48, and that is because you have a lot more territory and you have a lot more wilderness than exists in a lot of the places. Like I live just right now right outside Memphis, Tennessee, and while there is still some wilderness, and there's certainly plenty of fields and nature around, it's definitely different than Alaska. Tell me just a little bit about some of the things that you all do, and specifically things you all do as a family there in Alaska.
Wow. Okay. So yes, the ratio of people versus space is really good. I mean, there's a lot of space for the amount of people that we have. But I want to say one thing is that much of my life is the same as much as anybody else's life that's, in the continental 48 states. We have a home, our home has heat, we have vehicles, we are about 8 miles from the edge of town. So it's not like I live in an igloo or I'm chasing polar bears out of my yard every day. So there's a very much a normal part of my life that would be just like anybody else's.
Absolutely.
And in our town, I live in Fairbanks. And so, we have, regular stores like Walmart and Lowe's, those type of things. So those are all things that kind of make things normal. There is a big temperature extreme here. It could be up to almost 90-ish degrees in the summertime, maybe a little bit more on, infrequent times. Normally it's about 70 or 80 in the summer. In the wintertime, we generally have like 20 or 30 below and occasionally 50 below. So that's a, big temperature swing.
One of the things that I find astounding is when people who've lived in Alaska and places like Alaska with complete normalcy say the words temperature below. Because down here in Memphis, I can tell you if we got to 0, there would be panic and people would literally be dying because we are not prepared for anything that's at 0, let alone anything that's below that. And so it is always amusing to me when I talk with someone who's from Alaska or anywhere, that far north on our globe, that they have come to grips with not only the ability for temperatures to get that low, but to survive in it. And that kind of leads me right into one of your areas of expertise, and one of the areas of your training and time in the military was specifically geared towards survival training. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I spent time as a medic in infantry units, and then I spent about 10 and a half years in special operations before I went to the survival school that teaches people to survive in the woods in case they're isolated or they're just lost in the woods. And it was very intense school. The school isolates the students with, technology, no phones, no news, nothing like that. And we also control very much their diets and their sleep schedule. So they're isolated, they're hungry, they're tired, they're wet. We take pretty much all the comfort items away. And so it just is a very rugged, difficult school that's very demanding. And we taught things like shelter building, fire building, navigating with the stars, what to eat, how to find it, both plants or animals, how to trap it, or fishing. We also talked about, dangerous snakes versus non-venomous snakes.
So when you say survival school, I mean, what age range are we talking? Who was this geared towards?
Well, there was a lot of people that was in their young 20s. Most of them were Green Beret Army Special Forces candidates, meaning that they were on their way doing different things to get them to ultimately be Special Forces in the Army.
And one of the things that is, I think, important, anytime you're talking about survival, anytime you're talking about survival training, and you can obviously tell me your perspective on this, is mentality and your mental perspective or your mental preparation. Does that have a lot to do with it?
Yes. really what you think mentally affects a lot of your survivability. And when I worked at the school, we had a filing cabinet that was big, and it had endless accounts of survival stories from Army to other people's Army, from a different country to our different branches of our service, but including guys that would drive through the desert and their car would break down. And many times people had a lot of training and a lot of things that they needed gear-wise, and they failed to survive because their mind wasn't right. And also there was people that had no equipment, had no training, but they just wouldn't give up. And they just pushed through, and they were able to survive very difficult situations just because of their mindset.
As we kind of turn the corner towards fatherhood, you mentioned that you have 10 kids. You mentioned that you have 5 boys. When you're talking about mental perspective, when you're talking about mindset, and when you're talking about enduring a situation or surviving a situation based upon that mindset, based upon and being affected by that mindset, one of the things that just goes straight back to my mind is the reality that the same thing is true in a spiritual sense. The same thing is true when we deal with realities of spiritual situations we find ourselves in, spiritual challenges we find ourselves in, is individuals who have never prepared themselves and individuals who lose their perspective in the midst of those struggles in life, whether that be a physical force on the outside putting pressure on a spiritual situation, or inward temptation putting pressure on a spiritual situation, or even a family situation can also definitely have an impact. The ability to keep your mind where it belongs, keep your mind focused on what is right, keep your perspective on eternity is, I think, one of those things that Scripture draws out over and over and over again. When, for instance, Paul says, I set my mind on things above. I don't focus on here. I don't focus on now. How important is it, as you're teaching survival training, as you're teaching these young guys to get through this, through these events and through these trainings to get to levels like SEAL training or something like that? How important is it that they see the end and not just the obstacle?
It's very important because you have to have a goal. But I think one of the things that we taught was the dangers of survival in a survival situation. We might talk about the heat, the cold, the rain, the weather. We talk about different aspects that affect your ability to survive, the availability of food. But the greatest danger of survival is your mindset. And the two things that we would highlight is complacency, like a passivity, not really taking initiative and doing what you need to do. And the second one is a desire for temporary comfort. And you can be sidetracked with, at home, I would be doing this right now, or at home, I could brush my teeth, or at home, I could go to the refrigerator and get food. But that's not the situation that you're in right now. And those things will distract you from what you do have to do. And so you do have to keep your mind on the end goal, of getting back home, but you can't be distracted by what you don't have currently.
Good point. So as we think about fathers raising sons, what things have you done in your career or in your life or in your homeschooling? What are some of the things you've done in trying to train kids to be prepared for life?
Well, there's all the normal things, the regular schooling, but we try to take school outside of the classroom as much as possible. So when I go to town, I try to take one or more of my boys with me, and we go to Lowe's and we're like, okay, well, I got to buy this. Which one of these should I buy? Should I buy the value pack that's got a bunch? Which ultimately costs more, or should I buy just the 2 or 3 that I need immediately? So, there's that consumer math, and also how to fix things. Like how can you change your oil in your car? How do these tools work? And those type of things. But then also there's, you want to show them, okay, now you have this skill. Who can you help with it? What can you do with it? when we're fishing on the beach, we'll take a fish apart, we'll gut it. And then we're like, okay, well, this is the heart. So that's your biology lesson, because you can go over the anatomy. You can also go over geography when you're traveling. Homeschooling has just really opened up a lot of flexibility to expose my kids to a lot of different things at a lot of different levels. And it never stops. It's always happening. And in all those environments where you can see the mountains, you can look at the fish, you can look at the weather, and you say, God made these, and God has put these things in order. And that mountain didn't exist because it just blew up. It didn't come from nothing. Somebody put it there. And so there's that constant reminder that God is there, just, kind of like what Romans says, and the Bible talks about that nature speaks to God's existence.
Absolutely, it does. And Psalm 19 also speaks to that very idea that the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows his handiwork. And it is interesting that as you look at nature, as you look at training kids to be prepared for life, we have to train them in so many different areas. And in the same way that someone in the military has to be trained in a lot of different aspects to be able to survive, to be able to thrive, to be able to accomplish their mission, we have to do the same thing with kids. We don't, necessarily send them off to boot camp and that type of thing. But at the same time, we do need to prepare them for discomfort and, obedience. We need to prepare them for comfort and obedience. One of the biggest struggles, I think it's interesting, in the Old Testament, one of the biggest struggles that Israel had came not when they were persecuted, not when they were in trouble, not when they perceived the danger around them, but when they got comfortable. What are some of the dangers? What are some of the things that the military taught you about not assuming things when the situation seems good?
A very easy example is I've got like a little tarp or a poncho pulled up as a shelter. I'm out of the rain. I have a little fire. I'm warm. I'm enjoying the fire, but I only have so much firewood. So if I sit under my poncho and build up, and my fire can just die down and run out of wood. Or I could put all my wood on at one time and have this really big fire, but then I have to leave my shelter, go in the rain, leave my fire to collect more firewood. And so I could just sit there and be complacent and let things happen, or I can be proactive and actually go out and do something.
One of the things that brings to mind is, as you look at your surroundings, you have to be trained to see resources. You have to be taught to see the world around you as an opportunity and not just something that exists. I think a lot of people, especially when they grow up in a metropolitan culture, they grow up in a city, when they grow up in a time and a place where the things they have are provided from the store exclusively and not from nature and the world around them, they see the world around them, or they have a tendency, I think in my mind, to see the world around them as something that may be even off limits. You drive down the road and you see land and you see valleys and you see mountains and you see trees, but it's somebody else's. But that, and in a way, that kind of cuts you off, saying, well, that's not a resource that's available to me. Is there a different perspective in Alaska about the nature, the world around you being part of the natural resources that exist for those who live there?
Yeah, for sure. Much of the state goes someplace to fish, be it Valdez or the Kenai or, different rivers that we all fish, and we all come from all over and then fish. And then of course, there's caribou hunting, which is not everywhere, but so you have to go to it. So people come, they may not have a lot of caribou where they live, but they come to maybe Fairbanks where there is some more caribou. Same thing with moose. And so people move around to get the resources. There's also a lot of state and federal land that is here, which most of the time it's not really restricted. Like you you can go on most of it, and you can ride four-wheelers, you can hike, you can go on a lot of different things. So there's a lot of resources. And for the most part, when you travel on the highway system, you can find, old rock mines or quarries or something like that. And if it's not posted, you can pretty much camp almost anywhere on the road for free. Just get off of it a little ways and you can camp. So it's very accessible here. That's
a very interesting and dynamic shift from what I grew up being accustomed to. Though it is a little closer to some of my earlier years in Eastern Kentucky, and I know your background is from West Virginia. You get up there in the mountains, you get up there in the coal mining country, and the people do have a little bit different perspective about nature and about the outdoors, where they do consider the land to be something that's available to them. And I think there's a little bit of difference from that when you get into land like here in the Mid-South, where it's primarily farmland. It's primarily owned property, fenced off farmland. And when you get up in the mountains, when you get up in places like Kentucky and West Virginia, and it's just a lot more wilderness, a lot more, no fences, and when you get outside the city, at least, you have kind of a different perspective about that.
Well, there's a big mind shift for us because we moved here. When we were in Tennessee, we decided, okay, when we get out of the Army, we want to own 40 or 60 acres and build up this homestead kind of thing. And so when we moved to Alaska, we kind of brought that mindset with us, like, oh, we need 40 or 60 acres. But the reality is, in Alaska, you don't really need to own your own 40 acres because there's lots of places to cut firewood. You can have 3 acres and have a lot of space because there's so much more public land that's available.
Absolutely. That's an interesting point. Now, something that I wanted to have you do as we were discussing this is kind of walk me through your military career. Tell me a little bit about how you got into the military, why you got into the military, what stage in life were you in when you entered the military, and then kind of take us through your career just a little bit.
So I went to basic training immediately after graduating high school at Fort Leavenworth. My mind just went blank. So I went to basic training immediately upon graduating high school. I spent about a little bit over a year in the reserves, and then I decided to go active duty. So I went to Fort Irwin, California. I was a medic with the infantry unit there. There we played bad guys. So we pretended to be a Soviet kind of force, and the other units would come there and practice fighting us in the desert. So it was about desert survival, desert warfare, and fighting like a Soviet bloc style country. From there, I got recruited into special forces, or special operations would be the better correct term. And I was still a medic. And so I became a flight medic. They sent me to lots of schools like Airborne, Air Assault, the Survival School. And I just did a lot of different things. I also traveled and I lived in Puerto Rico at the Navy base for about 4 years, kind of doing the same kind of job. So I was in and out of Fort Campbell, Puerto Rico. Then I moved to Fort Bragg, which is where I worked out at Camp McCall, which is about an hour from Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I worked at that survival school. And then from there, I kind of wanted to shift gears. Had some injuries and I just kind of wanted a break, and I wanted to kind of be at home more. So I took a job in Alaska at a hospital. It's beneficial for my military career to kind of have diversity, which I really didn't have any up until that point. So I took that job and I kind of worked as administration at the hospital. I didn't really do a lot of medicine. I just made business decisions, and it was kind of boring, but it was a neat experience.
Right. When you've had the excitement, diversity looks like boring.
Right. Right.
So, in your time in the military, did you travel very much? Were you in a bunch of different countries?
Yes. I couldn't tell you for sure. I estimate about 30 or 40 countries. I think that's about right. And then, of course, just traveling at airports, if you're just checking them off, then there might be 10 more where I just was there for a couple hours at a layover at some airport.
Sure.
A lot of that was South America and the Caribbean islands. I did a lot in South America, and I did a lot in the Middle East as well. Not so much in Africa, some in Europe.
So as you traveled with the military, what are some of the things that you did mentally, or worked through as you prepared to, deploy or prepared to leave this country, go to other countries? What are some of the things that you were thinking about and preparing for mentally? Because again, we come from that perspective of mental preparation, being mentally prepared for what may come. What were some of the things that you were doing mentally to get yourself ready for traveling?
I spent a lot of my time packing because you don't really know what you're going to get into. So you have to be prepared for a lot of diversity. You may think you're going to a country for some type of training event, and that's legitimately what you were going to go do. But then you get down there, there's an emergency in that country or a neighboring country, and then you just get shifted over. And so you had to be very flexible in what to expect and how long you might be there and what you might do while you're there.
Interesting. Flexibility in life is one of those things that is often forced upon us, whether we like it or not. And, as you prepare others, as you prepare yourself for spiritual situations, spiritual flexibility, not in the sense of being flexible with Scripture and saying, well, I'm just going to be flexible and not just ignore what God said, but instead being flexible and understanding that you have to apply the Word of God in many different circumstances is one of those things I think we have to teach kids. If you were approaching that, from your background, how would you teach a child or a teen to be flexible in their understanding of life, but also flexible in their understanding of how to grow and accomplish their goals as a Christian?
So I think you start with their worldview, and you start at an early age. Science and social studies, those are the subjects that you have to be very careful with when you pick curriculum. You can use any of the many teaching textbooks, you can use a lot of different subjects for math, and it doesn't really matter. But you have to focus on their worldview, and their worldview is going to be drawn from their understanding of the Bible, their understanding of history, and their understanding of science. And then part of that is seeing you solve life's problems that life gives you by drawing on your relationship with God and your worldview. And that, I think that's incredibly important, that they see me solve my problems using the Bible and my worldview. And then they like, that's good. And it works for me. I'm like, this is solving my problems.
Absolutely. I think that is a fundamental thing and a reality that we need to come to grasp of. We need to teach. We need to encourage our children to grow and understand. And is that the Bible's not just a list of do's and don'ts, and it's not just a prescription for how to worship and what you're supposed to do on Sundays. It is an explanation of life. It is an explanation of why life exists. And it is an explanation of where life is going. And, Peter tells us that God has given to us in his revelation of Jesus Christ, he has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness. So as we go through the struggles, as we go through the difficulties, when we get faced by, faced up against the world and get told by the world, no, you need to conform to what we expect. How do we take our biblical knowledge, our biblical training, and still stand firm while at the same time realizing there will be situations where we don't have control? And I'm sure one of those that's a reality that you would have faced in the military, is sometimes you're not in charge and you're not even given a choice. So how do you keep the spiritual standards that you have from Scripture while at the same time facing the difficulties of being placed in difficult circumstances by the reality of your life?
So realizing that I am often powerless to affect very much, and that ultimately, God is going to settle all scores. God is very powerful. God can change situations. God can change me to make me be able to handle the situation that I'm in. And I think that's important. And the other thing is there's this desire that you have to have. You have to want truth more than you want comfort, before you want riches, before you want acceptance from your friends. Truth has to be important to you, and that has to be grounding. That's what grounds you to your course in life.
Buy the truth and sell it not, I think the book of Proverbs says.
Right.
When you grasp onto truth, when you grasp onto being prepared, when you grasp onto a reality that says, I will accomplish what I've been put here and I won't be complacent. All of these things are decisions. All of these things are choices. Now, sometimes we may make them subconsciously. Sometimes we may choose a path without giving it true rational thought. But how do we teach kids? How do we teach our sons to choose their direction?
So first, you have to ground them well in the Word, which means more than just taking the Sunday morning Bible class. You have to show them that it's important in your life by reading it, studying it, and knowing it. You have to teach them the basic narrative of the Bible. You have to start with that before you can get into like the specific truths. So that has to be well grounded. And then, you kind of have to guide them. And I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but it's like you have to guide them to like a career, or find out what they're interested in. And then you kind of have to help them on that path to kind of choose and sift out what specific thing they want to do. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So I think you headed right down the direction that I wanted to take this, and that is, as parents and as Christian parents, do we need to be making all of our children's choices for us?
No, absolutely not. What you need to do is you need to allow the kids, and this is very challenging, but you need to allow the kids to make as many decisions as they can for themselves as early as they can do it. And your job as a parent is to present choices to them, but control the negative outcome. What I mean is limit the negative outcome, right? So I don't allow my kids to decide to do roofing work when they're 4 because they'll fall off the roof, right? But if you want to ride your bicycle down the hill in the backyard when you're 4, that may not work out for you, but I'm going to let you do it.
Absolutely.
And you're going to learn. But the other thing is sometimes it's good is if you warn them, don't preach their life to them, but just say, hey, that might not be a good idea, and then walk away. And then when they ride that bicycle down that too steep of a bank and they get hurt, they learn 2 things. 1, don't ride your bike down that steep hill. And then 2, maybe dad knows something of what he's talking about.
Absolutely. And, recently, just this last year, I made an unwise decision and ended up with a surgery and a broken arm in 3 places. And I learned that I'm not yet done learning my restrictions. I'm not yet done learning wisdom, because someone advised me very strongly not to jump out of that tree from 10 feet up. And I didn't take the advice. I did jump out of the tree. So, as we go through life, we do fall down. We do sometimes get broken, and we do have to continue. We do have to move forward. We can't stay in that state. We've got to develop past that. And that doesn't come naturally, in the sense of, yes, children naturally learn to walk and fall down and get up. But that's when they're not consciously choosing that. That's when, nature's taking over. There comes a point in our lives where the mind and fear and a lot of other things begin to take control of what we do. And we have to develop and we have to prepare our children to be able to make those choices when those hard times come. One of the things that God tells Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 6, and this has kind of been a discussion that continues to come back up in our podcast, is God says, teach your children when they get up in the morning. Teach your children when you're walking by the way. Teach your children when you're sitting down. Teach your children when they lie down at night. Why does he say, go teach your children all these different times during the day? Why would he focus on all day long, teach your children who I am?
Because the world is going to speak lies to them as much as possible. And the world, Satan, is going to speak lies to them all day long, from the online stuff to peer pressure with friends to billboards that you drive past to things that you might see, advertisements in stores or retail stores about what clothes you should buy, what food you should eat, and it's filled full of lies. And so to counter that, you have to be extremely diligent to teach them God's word, teach them truths in life, teach them truth about themselves, teach them truth about God, teach them truth about history, teach them truth about science, so that they can combat that and have a source to draw on.
I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here. When you were in the military, how far into your career did you get married?
I was in the Army for probably 12 years before I got married. Maybe about 10 or 12.
How did life shift for you in the military when children came along?
Well, so I was a single guy and I had all the special duty pays, I did dangerous stuff. And so I had a lot of freedom. And I mean, literally one time I came home and my boss had put a note on my door, because I lived in the barracks, and he says, don't unpack, plane tickets under the door. And I opened the door and there on the floor is my airplane ticket. And I opened it up and I looked at it, and he had another note that says, I'm not in town, I've already left, but here's your itinerary, here's your plane ticket. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, I'm leaving in like 16 hours. And so I just kind of washed some clothes. I kind of kept packed and I just kind of left. And there was a lot of fluidness, a lot of change. When I got married, I was still obligated for about 3 years to kind of finish a certain commitment. And it just was not going to work being married. Claire is very valuable to me and I love her, and I married her because I wanted a marriage. And then so I quickly kind of like, I got to change my job. Mm-hmm. And that's when I went to the survival school. And although it was very demanding and still took a lot of hours, there wasn't as much deployments and there wasn't as much being gone from home.
So as we continue to redirect ideas, stories, and events back to fatherhood, what you're telling me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what you're telling me is you looked at marriage and you looked at family and you looked at your home and you said, I've got to make choices in my job that help instead of hinder my home.
Yes. And I took a promotion. I didn't lose rank, but I took a different position. I was offered a very senior position in my old job, and other jobs would have meant promotions and more pay. And so when I took the survival job, I took a cut in pay, or, specialty pays, because I wasn't doing dangerous stuff anymore. And I also took positional, I don't know what you call it, higher positions in organizations. I took a cut in those so I could have a stability. When I got to the survival school, like the second day there, they handed me a calendar for the whole year. And I looked at it and I about cried. I'm like, look, I can tell you what I'm doing on this Thursday, 6 months from now at 10 o'clock. I can tell you what I'm going to be doing. And that stability was really what I needed for a family. At that point, I had a son my oldest son had just turned 1. Claire and I had been married about 4 years, and we were just tired of me being gone all the time and the uncertainty of knowing what I'm going to do in the next 12 hours.
Sure. That can be a definite struggle. And, one of those things that I wanted to get into as I was thinking about our conversation and planning for it is, it can be very hard to be in an occupation like the military and have a family. It can be very hard on the family and the people left behind when you've got to leave, you've got to deploy, you've got to be gone. And so coming to grips with the reality that sometimes in life we've charted a course, we've put ourselves on a course when we're single, and that course works fine when you're single, but that doesn't mean that course is going to work forever. And prioritizing family, prioritizing their needs over that pay, that job, that situation is sometimes something we have to do. And sometimes we have to do it in a way that is going to cause different struggles for the family. So if you take a pay cut, or if you've got to find a different job, or even someone who's not in the military, if they're in a job that's having them travel, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, they get married, they have kids, they have a responsibility at home, and now they've got to reconsider, wait a minute, is this the future I see for myself? Is this what's good for my family? And what you're telling me is sometimes as you look at that, you say, I'm going to have to sacrifice because it's best for them.
Yes. I think sometimes being home, talking about the Army, being the family members being at home is sometimes harder, or often harder, than me being gone. Like I would go somewhere and I'd have very hard environments, a lot of different things happen, be combat or whatever else. But I knew I was alive and I knew I was getting fed. Clara had talked to me 4 days ago, and that was the last time she actually knew that I was still alive. And so, her heart would just melt and just be on edge until that next phone call when she'd actually know that I'm still alive.
That's a really hard place to be for a family member.
Yeah.
So as we focus on raising boys, you said you have 5 boys, you have 10 children. How alike are those 5 boys? Are they very similar, or they have very different personalities?
Very different personalities. They're all interested in some of the same things, but they're all very different. We have some that are big risk takers. We have some that are very conservative. We have some that are very relationship focused, but they all like outdoorsy kind of stuff, because that's kind of what we, as a family, we tend to travel a lot to go get fish, to go hunt, and we tend to camp a lot and, do things like that. So they like working with tools. They like being outdoors. They like 4-wheelers, which is for us is like it's like a tool. A 4-wheeler is more like a tractor than it is like just to go out and ride and have fun. Although we do that. I don't want to lie, but it's more like a tool. And so we use them a lot for work: snow plowing, dragging firewood, moving fish, moving gear, moving people around to get to different spots to hunt or to fish or things like that. So, they enjoy all those things, but you have to treat each boy different, and in treating each boy different for their needs, their likes, their abilities, is treating them in a way all the same. It's fair when you treat them differently.
I think that's an interesting point, and one definitely worth kind of sticking away for those of you who are listening, is that having equal opportunity is fair. It doesn't mean, though, and fairness doesn't mean that you're going to always get the same thing, that you're going to always have the same opportunity. But, as we raise kids, situations are going to be different. When the youngest one is 10, life is going to be very different than maybe when the oldest one turned 10. Pay may be different. Salaries may be different. Location may be different. There's a lot of changes that take place as different children grow up, especially when you have a significant age gap in between those kids. And some of them are going to get some experiences that others aren't. But as we teach them, as we train them, as we develop their preparation for life, what are some of the indicators you look for? What are some of the things you kind of key in on with your own kids about teaching them and preparing them for the future? What are some of those either personality traits or actions or things that you kind of look for?
Well, Gary Smalley developed like the lion, the beaver, the retriever, and the otter. And I would encourage people to look at that, because it helps people understand that they're different than me. My sons have similar things to me, similar things to their mom, and in some ways they're their own person. And so some of us move at a different pace of life, some faster than some slower. So one of my sons is a very detail orientated son, and my wife isn't detail orientated, she's big picture. And I'm, somewhere in the middle, but a little bit closer to details. And so I have to realize that they're different than me because God made them different than me, both their learning style, how they learn, how they interact with people and relationships and details and the events of life is very different. And some of that I have to shape and train. And my job as a dad is to help them find a balance and not just let them go to an extreme because it's more comfortable. But I also have to respect the fact that God made them a certain way. And then there's going to be strengths and weaknesses with that. And that's part of my job as a dad, is help them realize their strengths and their weaknesses to kind of help them move forward in life.
What are some of the things that you remember from growing up and being a son, being raised, that have impacted you in a positive way, at least in your mind, as a father?
Do you know how God can work bad things out for good? I think that is one of the things. My dad was present in the home and was a little bit engaged and did things until I was maybe 7 or 8. I'm kind of guessing. And then he was absent from the home. And for many years, we had some contact, and then and so that could be a bad thing. And for many years, I looked at it as a bad thing. But what I've come to realize is it's really made me be engaged as a father. I really interact with the kids. I'm really involved in their different aspects of life. And I think in part because I feel like I missed out on something with my dad. And so I'm over the top in some things, which I hope is a benefit to my kids.
Absolutely. You take those things that you have in life, you take those things that you didn't have any choice in, and you can develop those things into positives, but it requires recognition. And a lot of times we try and push back. We try and avoid thinking about the bad things in life. We try and separate ourselves from the difficulties in life, even mentally. And sometimes it is important for us to do the opposite, to consider those things. And the book of James points out that it is the trials, it is the difficulties, it is the struggles that we face in life that bring us to patience and wisdom and the things that God would have for us. And then he follows that up with, and ask God for patience, for wisdom. And we really do need to teach our children. We need to help them grasp this reality that they are not only expected to grow, but God expects them to seek wisdom, seek understanding, seek knowledge, seek patience, and all of those things come at a cost.
Yes. I mean, you can learn from your own mistakes, you can learn from others' mistakes, and the reality is you'll do a little bit of both, and you never really stop making mistakes. You may not make the same mistakes, but you're still going to make mistakes, like you're falling out of the tree. I've got enough injuries that I live with that I don't climb trees anymore. so I won't make your mistake, not because I wouldn't, but because I'm not really in trees.
Now, for just a clarifying point, I didn't fall. I jumped. It was completely intentional.
Right. Very deliberate.
I think that makes me not a klutz, but a fool. So, in this regard, one other question, because we kind of bring this to a close. What are some of your proudest moments as a dad?
Wow. My kids make me proud. They do a lot of things that I'm just proud of. And it's very, very broad. Some of those is when they accepted Jesus as their savior. And and I was involved in that, the teaching and the baptism and just involved with that. Some of it is when they do acts of service, when they give up something that they own, they do something and go out of their way to try to help. Sometimes it's when my kids find somebody who's not popular, who's being made fun of, and they stand up for that person. Those are some of the things that really make me proud. And there's multiple examples of those. And I just really have enjoyed them choosing self-sacrifice and choosing God over choosing what they may want or that comfort.
That's profound and important, and one of those things that I think would, given the thought and given the reality of a father trying to be a good father, it's one of those things that I think we all should be looking for. We should all be seeing and looking for opportunities to not only recognize our kids for doing what's right and choosing. And I think that's a very important thing. You pointed out not only that they were doing it, but they were choosing it. They were actively making a choice to put someone else first, to help others. And that's one of the things that we look for. That's one of the things we kind of set the standard for ourselves. Are we succeeding? Is, can we see where our children are choosing good for good's sake? Or are we always having to push them into good? Because if we're always having to push them into good, that's a warning sign. That tells us that there's something wrong, because they don't have their own understanding of what they should be doing. They're just doing what their parents have said.
Right. And that goes back in part because we've been talking about mistakes, and I make mistakes. I lose my self-control. I get, angrier than I should at things that I shouldn't. I get impatient. I make wrong decisions about finances. I say mean things to people. And so when I see these, my kids aren't blind. They see me make mistakes. And so when my kids see me make mistakes, or when I just have a struggle, either it be a temptation or just situations in life are hard, where do I turn? What do I do? Because they're going to model that behavior. So when I make a mistake, do I say I'm sorry, or do I just expect my kids to? When I'm in a hard time and I'm being tempted, or when finances aren't as abundant as what I want, or the car breaks down, do I do something that I want to do, or do I look to God for answers? And I think that helps them. If I'm content with the results of me doing the right thing, making the right decisions, turning to God, they're going to hey, my dad lives a good life, not because he's wealthy, not because he's got lots of hair, not because of a lot of things, but he lives a good life because he's serving God. And it really does work for him. He does truly embrace it. And then that's going to help them, because it's the example. I'm living the example. And that's one of the things about parenthood. It's what are the things that I want my kids to know? And I started making a list, and I'm oh my, I'm in trouble because I don't pattern these as good as what I want my kids to. So I've got to grow up. I've got to make changes in my life so that I can be the right example for my family.
As we kind of wrap this up and bring it to a close, I think what you have exemplified and what you've brought to the forefront is not only in life do we need to be guarding against complacency, do we need to be guarding against being too focused on temporary comfort, but as dads, we have to be self-examining. We have to be looking at our goals for our children and then measuring whether or not we're helping them get to those goals, whether we're modeling the achieving of those goals. And if we've got the right goals, if we've set the right goals in eternity, in spiritual matters, in physical matters, in emotional matters, if we've set those goals where they need to be, then we need to not be the roadblock to them reaching those goals. And that means we've got to look at ourselves. And that's part of what this show is all about. That's part of what this program is about, is getting dads to look at themselves. If you had one piece of advice that you would give to someone who's a dad for the very first time. They just, they're bringing home that kid, or that kid's 6 months or a year old. What advice would you give to a new dad?
So praying to God for the future of your child, and put God first in your life, and make sure that your wife is also a priority in your life, because your kid will see how you treat your wife, and how you treat other people will model their concept of God. And praying for them, and just them seeing you do the right things with your relationship with God and your wife will go a long way. So praying for the kid, praying for yourself that you will be the right role model, and take really good care of your wife and just cherish her.
Lance, thank you so much for being with us. You've brought some incredible points. You've got a great history, and we are so blessed to know you, and so blessed to be able to have you on the show today.
All right. Thank you very much.
For everyone who's joined us, thank you for sticking with us through the entire episode. Thank you for watching Saving Our Sons, and thank you for caring about dads. You may be a dad right now. You may be looking to be a dad one day, or you may be through and finished with your time as a raising young children parent, but you may have influence on dads around you. You may have influence on fathers around you that you can make a difference in their lives. We hope you'll share this program with other dads, but we also hope that you'll take some of the things that we've talked about. You'll model them in your own life. You'll grow from them. You'll help others develop their skills in these areas, because being prepared is fundamental to success as a father, and success for our children. Thank you for being with us.
This is ETBN. Let the truth be told.